One of the majors put up more money. It was simply that.
When Peter was removed, Roger's offer, which was, I think, quite a relatively small amount of money, but he was going to spend a lot of money on the distribution, was not acceptable to the new management, who wanted as much cash coming in as possible in order to maximize their sale to EMI.
And then, in some sort of nasty, foot-stamping, little childish way, it seems to me, they were going to show that they didn't really care about the movie that British Lion had made, and and they didn't like it anyway. They didn't really understand it.
And they called me up to the office and said, well, this is the situation. It's decided, they say categorically that the film is too long.
And so they fiddled about with it like mad and took it out of the director's hands and made a very much shorter movie out of it.
And it was either 13 or 15 minutes too long. I can't really remember which. And they said, well, go ahead and do it, and we want to get rid of this as soon as possible.
The distributors asked us if the film was a little bit long and would we like it or still distribute it if it were shortened. And we said we thought it might be improved if it were shortened. It was a little bit long, but that we would take it either way.
And so they simply buried the film, and that meant cutting it to the point where it would be much more difficult to distribute in the States, and selling it to a tax shelter group there, who they must have known would not really ever distribute it.
I was more or less in a situation where I had to do what I was told to do.
The new management then just sliced the picture up like salami.
I had a screening with the heads of production of this new company, and they were highly delighted. They were so delighted, they sent me a crate of whiskey.
And I was very disappointed because the film had been gutted.
All sorts of scenes that I remember that we shot and were not there. So I thought, this is very strange. I wonder what's happened. So I went upstairs afterwards, purely out of courtesy, to say thank you to Michael Dealey, who had replaced Peter Snell as the managing director of British Lion. And he sat at his desk. He didn't get up when my wife walked in, which is always a pretty good guide towards somebody's character and behavior. And he said, well, what do you think of the film? And I said, well, I think it's a marvelous film, Michael. And Dennis said, yes, I think so too, and so did my wife. And he looked up at me and he said, I think it's one of the 10 worst films I've ever seen.
It was a sort of kick in the teeth to everybody, really. It doesn't matter too much to actors. Actors, have done the movie and they move on to something else. But when you've got, people who've put their lives into it, like the director and the writer and the people who are actually producing it, it was an awful, terrible thing to do.
The original script started off in Scotland with Edward Woodward receiving the letter addressed to him only, which quite set the difficulties at the beginning.
There was a scene where Lord Summerisle brings a young boy to be introduced to it was a sort of his sexual awakening by the landlord's daughter, and it's intercut with some snails and moving rather sensuously.
You don't see that Christopher Lee, who's actually in the first night, you don't see that he's actually orchestrating everything. You don't get that feeling of dread that comes from him pulling the strings.
All the fertility scenes, the dance scenes with the little girls.
The baker, the fishmonger, the doctor, the chemist.
A lot of the religious mumbo-jumbo had been cut out.
There was some wonderful material where Christopher talks about apples as if they were kind of, some wonderful gift from the gods.
It had been cut down to appeal to audiences with an extremely short attention span.
I saw it again, and I thought, well, I don't really miss anything. I know this is very controversial stuff, but I didn't really miss anything because I thought a lot of the things with the apples went on a bit, and we could do without it.
These scenes needed cutting, but they didn't need completely obliterating.
Once I had left the premises, both Michael and Daly and Barry Spikings had no faith in the picture at all, any more than they had in Don't Look Now, so they matched them up as a double bill, which was even in the 70s unheard of, in the sense that double bills had come and gone. And they really just kind of got it out there in the UK on a minimum basis.
No press show, no publicity. Until eventually, I think under pressure from various quarters, they did actually put the picture out.
The net result was that it did not have the kind of showing that it deserved.
I rang all the film critics I knew, and I said, would you do me a favor, and I will pay for your seats. Would you go and see this film? It's on now. And nobody asked me to pay for their seats, and they went as individuals. They paid for their own, and the acclaim for the film was virtually unanimous.
But there was an even greater result, which is, as I say, to come down to today, it turned it into almost the film they didn't want you to see.
So I rang up Peter Snell, I rang up Tony Shaffer, and I rang up Robin Hardy, and I said, look, what's happened to the rest of the stuff that was taken out? Because it's so marvellous, you know, can't we do something about this?
They probably got on to a British Lion and said, look, we've got your film has been finished and it's out. We're sending your negative down to your vaults in Shepperton Studios, which they did.
Robin Hardy went to the vaults at Shepperton Studios to look for the negative and the outtakes. He was met by somebody who he doesn't remember his name, in a terrible state of agitation.
There was a giant motorway being built, the M3, past Shepperton Studios, and the order was given to clear out the vaults, get rid of all the old positive trims.
The trucks came to take away all rubbish and trimmings and lots of stuff, and some idiot put it with the wrong cans.
The negative that came down from the lab was inadvertently put into the same vault, and the vault manager clearly put it in with the positive.
I can't remember anything like this ever happening in my entire life. I've made a terrible, terrible mistake. The most awful things have happened. We've lost the negative and the outtakes.
There's no question that all that stuff, including the negative from The Wicker Man, was inadvertently loaded and dumped into the M3.
I can't think of any other time that happened.
It's like, you know, a vicar taking the sacramental wine and using it for cleaning the floor. You don't do that with a negative.
But it could happen.
I said, well, how do you lose or mislay 1 or 2 or maybe 300 cans of film?
Christopher quite rightly says it has to be somewhere people don't destroy negative.
My belief is that it still exists somewhere, and only a very small number of people know where.